You stand at the harbor in Constantinople, 541. Tar burns on the pier. The smoke stings your throat. Men cough hard and hide it with their sleeves. A priest sprinkles water on a bundled shape and moves on. The ship from Alexandria ties in fast. Sailors avoid your eyes. They drag sacks that leak grain and something else. You hear a thud as a crate drops. The foreman curses. The sailors do not answer. They keep their heads down. The bells will not stop. You are told to carry lists for the city guard. Names of households. Numbers of sick. Names of the dead. You wet the reed in the ink and write what they say. The numbers look wrong. You scrape and write again. The foreman lowers his voice and points to the quarter beyond the baths. You mark it and feel the reed shake in your hand. The harbor does not sleep tonight. A deacon tells you the shrines are full. He says graves must move beyond the walls. The bishop will argue, he adds, but the carts keep rolling. You ask where the carts go. He points north and tells you to pray. He does not look at your face. One rule decides who enters the ground. A boy pulls your sleeve. He says his mother's face turned gray. He asks if she can rest at the church altar. You remember the new order. No body is inside the city churches. You start to speak. The boy is already running. You watch him vanish in the crowd. You smell vinegar on the stones. A porter tells you this happened before. He says Rome filled with funerals when soldiers came home from the Eastern Wars. He says a city can forget, then remember too late. You nod. You do not know those years. You only know this quay, this bell, this line of black-wrapped forms. The names keep coming. Time jump, 9 centuries earlier, Rome, 165. You stand at a camp road in winter. Soldiers cough into their fists. A physician opens a pustule with a blade. The smell turns your stomach. The officer orders you to carry the tally to the legate. You count fast. The wax tablet shows rows of marks. You hear the funeral pipes from the town. They called that one a soldier's plague. Back to the harbor, 541. The cargo master begs the clerk for a stamp. He wants the gates open before curfew. The clerk shakes his head. He lifts a lantern and studies the men for sores. One sailor shifts his weight. You see his neck swell. He tucks his scarf higher. He steps behind the gangplank rope. One name keeps surfacing. Time jump, 3 centuries earlier, Alexandria, 249. You stand in a courtyard as letters arrive from Carthage and Rome. Churchmen read them aloud. They say the sick choke and bleed, and families flee. They call for unity. Deacons carry bread to doorways. Neighbors shut their windows. You dip your cloth in water and tie it over your mouth. They learned who stayed and who ran. Love unexpected turns in history? Hit like and subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I'm curious where you're watching from. Back to the harbor, 541. A magistrate orders you to bring the tallies to the palace office at dawn. You must cross the forum before the crowds. He tells you to keep clear of the baths and the grain market. He says not to speak to strangers. He presses a wax seal into your palm with a list of streets. The seal feels warm. Someone watches the tallies too closely. You pass the hospice near the water gate. Nurses rub oil on arms and wipe fevered lips. You hear the low drone of a hymn. A monk tells you to carry word to a monastery outside the walls. He says they will take more bodies. You nod. You try to breathe slow. Your chest tightens anyway. The clock inside the city is running. You reach the edge of the pier. The rope creaks. The sailor with the scarf stumbles. His eyes roll white for a moment. The clerk leans in with the lantern and sees the swelling. You see it too. The sailor jerks back. He spits dark on the wood and grabs for the crate. The crate splits. Something scurries. The lantern tilts. And the harbor goes quiet as you step toward the spill. You grab the lantern before it hits the boards. Oil sloshes, but does not spill. The crate lies open. Rats streak for the shadow under the pilings. The clerk shouts for buckets. Sailors stomp and swing poles. One rat falls into the water. Another vanishes beneath the rope coil. The man with the scarf holds the rail and breathes through his teeth. The harbor guard orders the pier cleared. He points at you. Tallies. Now. You press the wax seal into your sleeve and move. A porter curses you for blocking his dolly. A priest presses a cloth to his mouth and looks away. The grain must still unload by dawn. You reach the counting house. The door bar lifts. A junior scribe takes your list and frowns at the columns. He asks who witnessed the numbers. You name the guard, the deacon, the foreman. He nods and bars the door again. You wait outside with the carts. The clerk returns with a fresh tablet. Some neighborhoods are gone from the rows. Your gut tightens. He says the prefect wants order. He says panic kills trade. He tells you to copy the new version and carry it to the palace office. Numbers vanish from the page without comment. He raises the lantern and sees your hands shake. Wash, he says. He points to a bucket of vinegar and water. You scrub your fingers until they sting. He pulls down the shutter. The bell keeps ringing at the quay. 3 streets away, the boy with the gray-faced mother joins a line at the hospice gate. The city would call it a pestilence. Later writers would name the year, 541. Procopius described swellings at the groin and armpit, sudden fever, and crowded cemeteries. The disease spread along grain routes from Egypt to Constantinople. The prefects set burial crews. They moved bodies beyond the walls when churches and courtyards filled. Emperor Justinian himself fell sick in 542 and survived. Trade slowed. Prices rose. Wages rose where hands were scarce. The court issued orders to study grain supply and control funeral practices. Fear stayed. Ships did not stop because fear grew. The empire had faced plague before. In 165, soldiers brought home a new sickness from the Eastern War. Chroniclers later called it the Antonine plague. Galen described fever, cough, and pox that scabbed. It lasted in waves for years. Town councils struggled to fill offices. Taxes lagged. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 during the later phase of the outbreak. Families altered wills. Guilds stretched to cover burials. The memory of those years lingered in rules on sanitation and on funeral space outside city bounds. Old wounds taught hard civic lessons. A century later, another crisis hit. From 249 to the early 260s, letters from Carthage, Alexandria, and Rome recorded a relentless disease. The bishop of Carthage, Cyprian, urged deacons to feed and wash the sick. Dionysius of Alexandria wrote of households abandoned and of volunteers who lifted bodies when families fled. Symptoms included relentless diarrhea, vomiting, throat ulcers, and fever. The death toll fell unevenly, but the effect on urban life was profound. Christian networks gained notice because they organized aid when others scattered. Municipal treasuries faced the cost of graves and orphans. Law courts adjusted schedules. Provincial governors reported shortages of labor. Communities learned who stood firm under strain. By 541, the capital carried those memories. Prefects knew to move burials outside the walls. Bishops argued over rights and contagion. The term pestilence gained weight in sermons and decrees. Provisions for grain and work gangs appeared quickly. Yet another force pushed quietly, the need to protect revenue and calm markets. Scribes edited tallies. Clerks shortened street lists. Orders moved fast from the palace to the harbor. What else changed in those lists? The man with the scarf did not return to the quay the next morning. The boys' hospice posted a notice, no more bodies at the altar. The monastery beyond the walls opened a new trench. The counting house sent your tablet onward with the palace seal. The city tried to keep its shape while carts rolled. The ships kept docking even as processions grew. Troops on the Danube heard rumors from the capital. Merchants on the Adriatic spread news and worry. City councils reopened old file chests to find rules from the last time. Some blamed foreigners. Others blamed sin. Physicians argued about causes. The prefects cared about carts, gates, and grain. One question now hung over the empire: was this the same killer as before? You stand with the packet at the palace door as the porter breaks the seal and reads the streets you did not write. He looks up at you and nods toward the inner hall. Someone wants to see you. The porter led the messenger through a side hall and into a lamplit room. A fiscal officer waited with 2 tablets. He asked about the harbor list. He asked who saw the swellings. The messenger named the clerk, the guard, and the deacon. The officer listened and tapped the wax with a stylus. Not all numbers were numbers. He slid one tablet across the table. Certain streets were shaved to half their count. Workshops near the baths lost entire lines. The officer said the palace wished to steady trade. He said too many figures at once would choke the markets and the roads. He issued an order for burial crews to work outside the walls. He warned against looting sealed houses. He folded the order and pressed a seal. The edict carried a price. Outside, the bells still rang. Burial gangs hauled stretchers past the colonnade. Scribes posted notices at church doors. No interments under floors. No wakes in courtyards. Grave trenches would open on the north slope near the monastery. The bishop protested. The prefect nodded and sent more carts. 3 months later, spring 542, the emperor sickened. Justinian lay feverish in the palace. Courtiers whispered about succession. The city held its breath. Then he rose again. Orders resumed. Officials fixed wages for grave workers and mule teams. They set limits on cart fees for carrying corpses to the trenches. They exempted some guilds from other duties so streets could clear. One recovery did not end fear. Time jump, Rome, 590. Rain fell. A new wave reached Italy. The city organized processions. Pope Gregory led litanies along the Tiber. Households draped their doors. Reports of deaths filled the diaconal lists. Grain boats faced quarantine at river landings. Memories of 541 returned with force. People watched for buboes. They sought relics and doctors. They buried outside the old walls again. Old rules came back with new urgency. Back to Constantinople, 542. The messenger carried notices through the market. Bakers measured flour with a city stamp. The grain office guarded the scales. A physician from Alexandria argued in the square. He said heat cleared miasma. A rival said fumigation saved none. The hospice posted new hours. The deacon wrote to a monastery upriver. The messenger delivered the letter and waited for a reply. The list still hid something. Time jump, the Antonine years, 166 to 172. Camps on the Rhine and Danube shrank. Town councils begged for recruits. The imperial post carried reports of empty workshops. Galen left Rome during one surge and later described the scabbing skin and long fever. Village shrines crowded. The empire issued orders to keep grain moving and to adjust tax assessments when curials died. The measures held some ground, but the losses marked a generation. Armies bled men without battle. Time jump, the years of Cyprian, 251 to 258. Deacons in Carthage washed the sick and buried the dead. Landowners fled to villas. City undertakers ran short of linen. Letters urged unity and care. Symptoms burned long and consumed strength. The plague did not vanish quickly. It taught cities to assign men to corpse crews and to fund orphan care. It favored organized communities that could share food when families broke under strain. Networks decided who survived the leanest weeks. Back to the capital, 543. Reports came from Antioch, Cyprus, and Sicily. The fiscal officer read them at a narrow desk. Every sheet showed edits. Deaths down. Streets missing. The messenger watched the stylus cross out more lines. He asked if the palace feared panic. The officer said the palace feared revolt if wages rose too far and grain failed. He said truth would return when the river traffic steadied. A steady river could drown a city. He sent the messenger to the harbor with a new task. Watch the grain ships. Count crews. Note any sudden swap of cargo or master. Record which merchants left the quay by night. Hand the notes to the officer only. Speak of them to no one. The messenger bowed and left. The clock and the bell argued in the dark. At the quay, the messenger found the clerk ordering vinegar and lime for the pier. Rope coils steamed in the evening air. A customs man refused a ship from Alexandria. Then a second official arrived and waved it through. The messenger watched the exchange and marked the names. He saw familiar sacks and a break in the sailcloth under the top layer. Something moved where no one looked. He followed the porter into a warehouse near the water gate. Lanterns burned low. The porter lifted a hatch and slid a crate down a chute into a boat below. The messenger stepped closer and read the painted mark on the wood. It matched a seal on the palace order he carried in his sleeve. The porter saw him watching and reached for the hatch bar. The porter grabbed the hatch bar. The messenger set his foot in the gap and pushed. Wood scraped. Lantern light showed sacks and a second layer beneath, sealed boxes with the palace mark. The porter swore and swung the bar. The messenger ducked. The bar hit the jamb. Dust fell. The seal was not a mistake. Boots sounded on the steps. A customs officer entered with a clerk from the grain office. They stared at the open hatch. The clerk told the porter to stand down. He told the messenger to follow him upstairs. No one spoke as they climbed to the counting loft. Bread could buy silence. The fiscal officer waited by the window. He did not look surprised. He pointed to the city. You hear the bell. You know what happens when bread runs short. He tapped the wax tablets. Streets were missing. Tally lines were halved. He did not deny it. He said the edits kept carts moving and calmed queues. He said the crates in the hatch held flour for ward kitchens and payments for mule teams. He said the ship below would leave by night to avoid a crowd. Numbers fell as graves multiplied. The messenger asked why the palace seal hid under grain sacks. The officer said new rules angered men who lost work at the baths and theaters. The city needed wages covered, burials paid, and grain stripped fast from ships. He said if the lists went out with full deaths, the guilds would strike, the price of flour would jump, and men would smash scales. He held the stylus in 2 fingers. We cut lines to hold the city, he said. We hold the city to hold the empire. The edit was a policy, not a blunder. Time jump, Gaul, 543 to 545. Reports reached Alls and Tours. Bishop Gregory's later pages would describe deaths and sudden swellings. Frankish kings opened rural shrines and moved burials out from towns. Markets thinned. Fields missed hands. Councils ordered grain from safer districts. Travelers carried news across the loire. Symptoms did not match the scabbing pox of the Antonine years or the throat ulcers of Cyprian's time. People spoke of lumps and sudden fever. Different signs bred the same fear. Back to the loft, 543. The officer slid a small purse across the table. For your watching, he said. You will bring notes to me only. You will write what I say for the public lists. The messenger stared at the purse and then at the window. Below, carts rolled toward the north slope. Monks waited at a trench. A boy stood near the line with a small bundle. The hospice had turned him away hours before. One life sat in the balance of a ledger. The messenger asked about the sailor with the scarf. The officer waved it off. He is already at the monastery, he said. We cannot close the harbor. The fleet from Alexandria must unload. The Nile will not wait for rumors. He sealed an order. More vinegar at the quay, more lime for the trenches, limits on cart fees, and a warning against wakes inside the walls. The city ran on orders and omissions. Time jump, Rome, 590 to 591. The second wave kept pressure on Italy. Gregory led processions. The Tiber banks saw funeral lines. Grain landings faced watchmen. The rule about burials outside walls returned again. The city did not forget the lesson. Keep bread moving, move graves farther, shorten gatherings, steady prices. The pattern held because fear of riot matched fear of disease. Old answers met a new killer. Back to Constantinople, Midsummer 543. The messenger left the loft with 2 tablets. One held the clean list. One held the full count. He tucked the full count under his tunic. He walked past the warehouse and paused. The hatch was shut. The boat below had pushed off along the wall. He now carried a double city. That night he slipped to the monastery beyond the walls. He found the boy asleep by the trench. A deacon covered the child with a cloak. The messenger gave the deacon the second tablet. Keep it, he said. If I vanish, take it to the bishop. The deacon looked at the seal and nodded once. At dawn, the prefect announced fixed wages for grave crews and limits for carriers. He praised the grain office for calm. He spoke in the forum while carts rattled by. The messenger watched from the column space. The fiscal officer stood behind the prefect and kept his eyes on the crowd. The city cheered because bread arrived. The messenger felt the purse in his sleeve. He felt the second tablet missing from his tunic. He turned toward the north gate. A hand touched his shoulder. The customs officer stood close and spoke low. "The officer wants the other tablet," he said. "He knows you made a copy. You will hand it over now." The customs officer's hand stayed on the messenger's shoulder. His breath smelled of vinegar. "The other tablet," he said. "Now." The messenger kept his voice even. He said he did not have it. The officer's grip tightened. "Then you will take me to it." The choice left no middle path. They moved through the forum edge. Lime dust hung in the air. Carts rolled toward the north gate. A woman held a strip of linen over her mouth. A bell beat from the harbor, slow and steady. The officer pushed the messenger ahead with 2 watchmen close behind. The gate guards waved them through on the officer's seal. Outside the walls, the monastery rise showed trenches and a narrow chapel. Monks worked in pairs with ropes and boards. A deacon poured water over his hands from a jar. The boy with the small bundles stood near the line. He saw the messenger and straightened. The dead still arrived without pause. The customs officer spoke first. "We will take the tablet you received last night." The deacon looked at the seal on the man's belt. He looked at the messenger. He did not move. The officer nodded to the watchman. They stepped toward the chapel door. The deacon barred their way with his arm. The messenger said the tablet held numbers, not magic. He said it listed streets and crews and counts. He said the city could face the truth and still hold. The customs officer shook his head. "Crowd the forum with those lines and you invite fire," he said. "My orders are clear." One order could bury a second list. Booths sounded on the road. The fiscal officer arrived with 2 clerks. He kept his hands behind his back. He greeted the monks and the boy with a thin nod. He did not greet the messenger. "We will take the tablet," he said. "We will return a clean copy to the bishop." Clean meant cut. The messenger asked about the boy's mother. The deacon lowered his eyes. She lay wrapped at the trench edge. The boy swallowed and held the bundle tighter. A monk took the rope. The bundle sank slow. The boy pressed his forehead to the board. The fiscal officer turned to the chapel. "Bring it," he said. The deacon stood firm. "You set the trenches," he said. "You set the cart fees. You bandwakes. We obey. This one we keep until the bishop reads it." The officer's jaw moved once. He raised his hand. The watchman advanced. The line between orders and bows held thin. The messenger stepped past the watchman and into the chapel. The customs officer grabbed his tunic and missed. Inside, cool air and oil smoke pressed close. The messenger saw the tablet under a folded cloth. He lifted it. Wax smelled faint and sweet. Numbers scored the surface. His thumb left a shallow smear. A smear could dull a city's memory. The fiscal officer stood in the doorway. "You will hand that to me," he said. "We study the streets or we lose them. Decide." The messenger looked at the boy outside. The monk had tied the trench board. The bell from the harbor beat again. The deacon waited with his hands at his sides. Silence pulled at the doorway. The messenger moved to the threshold. The customs officer blocked him. A watchman reached for the tablet. The messenger twisted and the wax edge cracked. A line broke. A street name bent. The fiscal officer winced. "Enough," he said. "Do not waste the count. Give it here." One shout would bring the crowd. The messenger lifted his voice. He called the street names still clear. He spoke the totals. He named the wards by the gate and the baths. Monks stopped. The boy looked up. The customs officer lunged. Fingers closed on the tablet. The messenger held tight. The wax slipped in his grip. The fiscal officer stepped forward, face set. The tablet tilted in both hands. A monk rang the chapel bell. Carts slowed on the road. The watchman looked back toward the city. The messenger drew a breath and met the officer's eyes. The officer did not blink. The bell struck again. The wax edge began to crumble, and the next word would decide which list lived. The tablet tilted. The messenger spoke first. He read the ward by the baths. He read the streets by the harbor and the forum edge. He read the trench counts outside the walls. The customs officer lunged again. The fiscal officer raised his hand. "Hold," he said. "No blows at the chapel." Order returned one breath at a time. People on the road had heard enough. A mule driver crossed himself. A monk wrote the figures on a scrap. The boy wiped his face with his sleeve and listened. The deacon stepped to the doorway and faced the officers. "Now you decide," he said. We all heard. One voice forced a choice. The fiscal officer lowered his hand. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the boy. He looked at the trench. "The bishop will receive the full tablet today," he said. "The city will receive the public list with ward kitchens and wages attached." He nodded to the customs officer. "Stand the watch, not the lash." The officer swallowed and stepped back. A compromise kept the street calm. The messenger handed the tablet to the deacon. The deacon passed it to a monk with steady hands. The monk placed it in a chest and turned the key. The fiscal officer issued orders at once. More carts, more lime, bread ration lines to start at dawn and end before noon. No wakes inside any gate. The monastery would receive flour each third day. The clerk wrote fast and sealed the slips. Time jump, autumn 543. Deaths fell. Carts still rolled, but fewer. The bishop issued a letter that matched the full count. The prefect did not protest. The fiscal office held to price limits through winter. Ward kitchens stayed open. Guilds sent men by rota to corpse crews. The market learned a new rhythm and kept it through the next summer. Small rules held a wide city. Time jump, Italy, 590 to 591. Processions lined the Tiber. Burials stayed outside the walls. River landings kept watch. City orders looked familiar now. Wages for grave men. Limits on fees. Grain guards at scales. The language echoed old decrees from the Antonine and Cyprian years. The playbook sharpened with each return. Old scars shaped fast responses. Time jump, Gaul and Spain, 6th to 7th centuries. Bishops recorded swellings and sudden fever. Councils named burial grounds beyond towns. Ports moved grain at dawn. Rural shrines took increased traffic. Networks of charity grew in reach and habit. Cities learned to post lists, not rumors. They learned to pay the men who lifted stretchers first. Practice turned fear into policy. Back to the capital, closing years of Justinian's reign. The messenger now worked at a ward kitchen. He kept a short ledger, flour in, loaves out. He visited the monastery when he could. The boy swept the chapel and read psalms in a clear voice. The customs officer kept his post at the quay. He watched sails and hands. He watched crates and seals. He kept vinegar near the ropes. Quiet routine replaced earlier panic. The fiscal officer kept his desk near the window. He still cut lines in public lists when crowds swelled. He still sent verses to pay mule teams and trench men. He still sent flour upriver at night when a ship docked late. He sent the full counts to the bishop now as a rule. He called it balance. He called it prudence. He never called it truth. Numbers lived in 2 ledgers. 3 lessons spread before the Black Death. The Antonine years taught the empire to move grain and adjust taxes when offices emptied. The plague of Cyprian taught cities to organize aid and keep burial crews funded. The Justinianic waves taught capitals to clear burials beyond the walls, to study prices, and to publish lists with care. These habits outlived emperors and popes. They set the frame that later cities would use when ships again carried death to their docks. Preparation began long before 1347. You stand once more at the harbor. The bell sounds slow. Vinegar bites the air. You hold a tablet and feel the wax warm under your thumb. You know the count. You know the risk. You know the choice they made to keep the line moving and the city standing. Numbers can save a city only if someone reads them. If you want more on medieval queens, councils, and crises, stay with this channel and share this episode.